everybody? That's right here in Wayne County. Welcome, Wayne County. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate seeing all of you. You know, we are the epicenter of election fraud in the state of Michigan. There is no doubt about it. There is no doubt about it. So we are very fortunate to have the last stop of this really marvelous tour of Michigan that we've been taking for the past 4 days here in Wayne County. You are going to be so impressed, I believe, with the acumen and the genteelness of this man. He is a senior fellow for the Claremont Institute. He's the founder of the Foundation for Constitutional Jurisprudence. He has been on every radio, television station you can imagine, and yet he is as down to earth as any one of us is. And it is a great honor for me to have been traveling for the past 4 days with this man. It was just so much fun. I do want to thank Ken and Penny Kreider for organizing this on such short notice. And I also want to thank the gracious Bishop Malcolm Reed and the elders of this church for allowing us this venue. Many venues did not allow us to show this movie because they said it was too controversial, as if speaking freely is controversial, as if petitioning our government for a redress of grievances is controversial, because that's the elements of this movie that are so shocking, to think that they can treat people the way they do. Our government has the ability to treat people very badly if they don't like what you're saying. And that is not a government of, by, and for the people. We all need to work together to protect our God-given rights that are codified in the U.S. Constitution for the protection of all of us against the usurpers who would try to steal away our right to freedom, a right to peacefully assemble, a right to practice our faith in the one true God, no matter what denomination you wish to congregate with. We have to protect the principles of the American Republic, as expressed most clearly, we believe, in a 9-0 Supreme Court decision called Norton versus Shelby County. That's why we study that case. We believe that it defines the principles of the American Republic better than any other court case. But we also believe that there is a lot of value in understanding the legal cases that have been decided that support the constitutional republic that we live in. Because many times you read the Constitution, but it's a wonderful document, but what do you do with it? Well, studying Supreme Court cases, as the group Magnificent Republic does on a weekly basis, gives you some tools to be able to understand the Constitution better and to be able to apply it to any particular issue that is your grievance, that you need redressed, that you need to petition your government for. Are you talking over me, Dr. Eastman? Now, I imagine that this group of people knows who Dr. John Eastman is. But I just wanted to remind you that the fake news media has been bashing him in print, on TV, online for the past 6 years now, all because he did what his career calling had him do. And that is, he's an attorney, and when you're an attorney, you are supposed to provide counsel so that your client can be successful in their endeavor. And that's exactly what he did. He counseled Vice President Mike Pence on the options that he might have had when he was opening up the electoral votes on January 6th. And the Constitution is pretty open, not real clear about what his specific duties are beyond opening and then having Congress be there. So Dr. Eastman knows it much better than I do, but that's the gist of it. He offered advice on the options that Vice President Pence could take, and he has been persecuted politically from that point forward, still ongoing today. I'm sure he'll give us a background story about where he's at with the situations. He's got a lawsuit pending in Georgia. He's got a lawsuit in Arizona. He's being recommended for disbarment in the California Bar Association. it's just, it's critically important that we protect John Eastman's right to speak freely, because his right is our right. I want to introduce Dr. John Eastman, offer him an opportunity to say a few words. We were going to open up a question and answer session before the movie, but it seems like they've got the technical difficulties ironed out.
I'm not sure yet.
Oh.
We're still working on it.
All right. Please issue a warm welcome for Dr. John Eastman.
I always thought that pastors could always get the sound working at their churches, so we'll figure it out. So I got a call late November of 2020 from the White House switchboard, or maybe Molly Michael, the president's executive assistant, said, will you hold for the president? I thought it was an old college buddy, pulling a prank on me. And I said, okay, Steve, what's going on? No, it really is the White House switchboard, and will you hold for the president? And then 2 seconds later, it's, John, we're having trouble with these court cases, not actually looking at the merits of our claims. How many have heard that 65 different cases rejected Trump's claims and therefore his claims were meritless, right? I mean, that's just the standard narrative. Almost every one of those cases were not dismissed on the merits, but they were dismissed on some technicalities. One of them, there was a guidance, I think from the Secretary of State in Michigan, might have been next door over in Wisconsin, I can't remember, but an illegal guidance about how they were going to do something on election day. Guidance was illegal, and they brought a lawsuit several months before the election to challenge it. And the court said, well, it's only a guidance, so until they actually follow the guidance on election day, we don't know they're actually going to break the law, so your case is dismissed because it's not right, not ready. And so when they followed the guidance on election day and violated the law, they then brought the suit again the next day and said, see, what we predicted was going to happen did happen. And the court said, you can't wait for your guys to lose and then bring the suit. You should have brought it months ago. And these were the kind of things with all these 65 cases we were dealing with. Some cases were properly dismissed. Most folks don't understand that if you're just an ordinary citizen sharing the same injury that everybody else shares, you don't have the right to bring a suit. You got to have a particularized injury. And so if you're just a voter and they were violating the voting laws, everybody else suffered the same injury that you did, nobody has the right to bring suit. And so a couple of citizens, outraged by what they were seeing, brought suits, and those were dismissed. Under current doctrine, that was proper. It's a doctrine I disagree with. It was one of the few fights I ever had with Justice Scalia, because he was one of the authors of that doctrine, and I think he's wrong about that, but that's what the current precedent is. But then the candidate should have standing, because the candidate had a particularized injury. He lost the election. That was different than just voters having their right to vote, right, that everybody else shared. Well, in Pennsylvania, they held that even the candidate doesn't have standing. Only the legislature does. And then 2 years later, when Biden it did executive orders letting all these government agencies basically weaponize the Democrat get out the vote effort, the legislature sued. And that same court said the legislature doesn't have standing, only the candidate does. And so these were the kind of games that we were dealing with. And why did President Trump call on me? The movie will make clear, but I was involved in the hanging Chad controversy. How many, you all are young, nobody remembers 2000, do they? Okay, how many remember the Nixon-Kennedy election? Okay. By the way, I was involved in several levels of that. At the Supreme Court with the famous Bush versus Gore case, but there were 6 or 7 trial level cases dealing with different technical issues. And the one I was involved with is how the dimpled chads. Remember the dimpled chads? So the hanging chads were if you didn't push it all the way through, but it was hanging. Was that evidence of voter intent to actually cast that? Or was it evidence of voter intent that I started to vote there and just couldn't do it and pulled back, right? That was the issue. But the dimpled chads was different. The experts on the machines, the tabulator machines, said it's impossible to put enough pressure with a stylus on a ballot to create an indentation in the paper without pushing it through either partially or wholly, without dimpling the paper. And we asked that expert, well, we've got thousands of these dimpled chads. You just said it's impossible. How did this happen? They said, well, it's possible if you stuff 6 or 7 ballots in the machine at a time and then try and use the stylus. So every single dimpled Chad was evidence of fraud. And think about that. Nobody, that never really kind of saw the light of day, but that was the trial. And then I was brought into the legislature to advise them on the legal authority of state legislatures to direct the manner for choosing presidential electors. And that plenary power was being usurped by the Florida Supreme Court, changing the rules of the game after the fact. And I was brought in to testify to them about their power and what they could do to protect their electoral vote in Florida. And after that testimony, they retained me to help draft a statute that they were prepared to pass if the US Supreme Court hadn't intervened and ended the matter. We premiered this at Mar-a-Lago last January. And before the movie, we had a panel discussion in the grand ballroom at Mar-a-Lago with me and Alan Dershowitz, who features in the movie, and Rudy Giuliani and Jeff Clark and Peter Navarro were all there. My daughter was there as well. She had our brand new grandson in her lap. And because he was 3 months old, she was sitting in the very back row in case, 3-month-olds kind of start fussing at unpredictable times. And she didn't want to interrupt things. So she was in the back row. And then out of the corner of her eye, she saw somebody she recognized standing in the back of the room listening to our panel discussion. And it was President Trump had come down to listen. And so she quick gets her phone out and gets a selfie of my grandson with the president behind him. He then went up to have his state dinner with Italian Prime Minister Giorgio Meloni and Scott Bessent and Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz. And then after their dinner, they all came down and watched the movie with us. Anyway, so we produced this movie to show 3 things, and I want you to kind of watch it to see if you think we accomplished it. We wanted to lay out the evidence of illegality and fraud that we had at the time, and we wanted to then show what my legal advice actually was rather than how it's been mischaracterized and the historical basis for it. And then we wanted to talk about the lawfare that has resulted in the 4 years since. And I wanted, at the end, I'll ask you whether you think the movie accomplished all that. All right, and as they say in Hollywood, roll them. What I thought the Constitution allowed for resolving disputes if electoral votes had been submitted that were improperly certified because the laws had not been followed. Authority of the legislatures. And it didn't take me half a second to say yes. I jumped at the opportunity.
Okay, let's back up.
Can you tell us if he's going to use support in this effort?
So not directly, partly because initially, when he did offer some support to some folks who didn't have nearly the national stage to raise money that I've had, he was threatened with obstruction of justice for witness tampering charges, yeah. So he backed away from that. Now, I will say this, you saw, if you go to my Legal Defense Fund site, givesendgo.com/Eastman, you'll see right up front a lovely picture of me with Donald Trump in the Oval Office. And a lot of such pictures, when people are using them to raise money, he asks them to take them down, or his organization does, and he hasn't asked me to take that down. So that thing is worth a lot, and I've raised nearly $1 million out of the $1.6 million we've spent so far on the legal fees. So,
where can we see this video again? I would very much like to.
MadisonMediaFund.org. They're the producers, MadisonMediaFund.org. And until Amazon Prime gets its act together and puts it on their paid platform, they're still making it available for free streaming. So MadisonMediaFund.org, and you can show it on your home TV, get a group of people together, get some popcorn going, and watch the movie.
And I might have misunderstood you at one point in the video. Did you say that you thought that Biden actually won the 2020 election, or did I misunderstand?
No, you missed that. Yeah. The lady asked me that was the press conference after I got indicted in Georgia, and the lawyer I hired he said, I can arrange to get you in at 3:30 in the morning. You can go in comfortable clothes and get in and out, and nobody will see you. I said, no. We're going to do this in broad daylight. I'm wearing a suit and tie. I'm a distinguished attorney, and I'm not going to pretend like I'm some common criminal trying to hide what went on. This was outrage. And so at the press conference I held after coming out of the jail, after being booked, that lady asked me the question, do you still believe the election was stolen? I said, absolutely.
You've been to many venues like this with much larger audiences too, I'm sure. Are you finding many people that attend and have interest that are less than 40 or even less than 50 years old?
I've done a couple. I've done a couple of these events with college or law school student chapters of the Federal Society, and they've been very enthusiastic. And they're, several of those student chapters are watching it on their own, and then I, call in and talk to them about it. So, but it's, look, I try and think back when I was in my 20s, and I had more immediate pressing things to deal with, like where I'm going to be able to afford my next meal, and I hope it wasn't just rice and beans again. There were those kind of things, and so, like in the afternoon, a lot of them are in classes, and so. What I've seen though happen over the last 2 weeks now, since the assassination of Charlie Kirk, is I think nothing short of a miracle. I mean, the number of young people that are converting or taking up seriously religious questions for the first time in their lives and getting engaged in politics for the first time in their lives is really stunning. And we are all Charlie Kirk now, right? I mean, I don't know how many of you watched that memorial, but I was bawling when Erica Kirk was speaking, and I don't know how she held it together, but for the grace of God.
Hello, I just want to say thanks for coming today and sharing the video and sharing everything. I just got a couple quick questions. Did those I think it was Pennsylvania you said, where the state reps were the first to kind of say that their electors weren't chosen fairly. Did they bring those concerns up prior, like more immediately after the election and try to get those resolved before January?
So it's very interesting. And people tell me, the legislatures did nothing, and these legislatures, like in Pennsylvania, were Republican. And I said, well, it's very important to assess what kind of Republican. Because if you added the anti-Trump Republicans to the Democrats, the Pennsylvania legislature was Democrat. And there were resolutions that were introduced. That Pennsylvania's got a very odd system. The legislature goes out of session on November 30th and doesn't start again until January 3rd. And in the whole month of December, there's no legislature. It's not like it's just, they could call them back in. There's no legislature to call back in. And there were resolutions introduced before November 30th when they went out of session, and the leadership, the anti-Trump leadership, blocked those resolutions, kicked them to a committee, they refused to take them up, and so the legislature session ended and the resolutions died. Then when they came back into session, they wanted, the pressure by the constituents, it was so great that even the leaders who had blocked it before were saying, we need time to assess the impact of this because our election, and this was the president pro tem of the Pennsylvania Senate. Our election was conducted illegally and should not have been certified. That was what the letter said to the Vice President of the United States.
Yeah, I've never found a politician that works hard enough, just so you know.
I found too many of them working hard enough for the wrong causes themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
By the way, I will say this. I did a debate recently at National Conservatism Conference on whether the gay marriage decision should be overturned. And I kind of laid out the various legal arguments, and then I said, but marriage is on the resurgence, and how do I know that? Because I saw that Nancy Pelosi is buying stock in diaper companies after Taylor Swift got engaged, and so maybe that's gonna happen.
You said right off the bat that people can't file individual actions if their damages are exactly the same as other people. What about class action? Couldn't a couple people join up and work together?
Well, you still have to have a particularized injury, the members of the class, that's different than the common population.
How about over 18?
Well, it's everybody over 18 isn't going to get you there. Now, again, this was the fight I had with Justice Scalia. The courts used to treat that particularized injury requirement as part of what they called prudential standing, not a constitutional requirement. And it's just, if you're getting just somebody who doesn't really have the key vested interest in the matter, you might end up with collusive suits and not really pursuing it hard. And so as a matter of prudence, the courts would not give that person recognition. Justice Scalia, in a couple of opinions, said, no, this is a constitutional requirement. And I dramatically disagreed with him. But that's the current doctrine, yeah.
Okay, so why didn't the U.S. government hire you? Why were you Trump's personal attorney anyway?
Well, because Trump's challenges here were in his capacity as candidate, not his capacity as president. And so government attorneys actually could not work for him in his private capacity as candidate. And you wouldn't want that, right? You wouldn't want government officials taking a side in a political campaign. Although Biden's people did it all the time, but that.
Wait, I don't understand, because could you explain that one more time? I just don't understand.
So let's suppose he wanted to hire me in 2016 for fights in the 2016 election. He's not the president, he's a candidate. The capacity that he was challenging these elections in 2020 was the same, as a candidate, not as the president.
Well, why did he challenge it as a president?
Because the wrong was to him as a candidate, not to him as the president. It was not an affront to the office, it was an affront to the candidate.
No, but it is a threat to office, that's what you're saying.
Well, but it put the shoe on the other foot.
From him though, from his perspective, legally.
Yeah, for his perspective, his standing in challenging the election was no different than Joe Biden's, who was also a candidate. In that capacity, they were both private citizens.
3 of us right here were at TCF Center in 2020. It's
5 of us.
5 of us.
Very good.
The
team.
How many of you got in? Or did you get in and then get kicked out?
This is the lady I went
It
with.
was the second day they wouldn't
We
let
signed
us.
the affidavit.
Okay.
Just for the record, my wife was there. She was behind the glass when they had the
Yep.
cardboard on. She didn't go out to get something to eat.
Yep.
So she was inside when Carson was
Well,
going on.
that's different.
So did my pictures in the movie convey accurately what was going
Yeah.
on?
Oh,
Yep.
absolutely.
Yep.
So there was so much cheating of every different nature. I worked at the adjudication. They had not a Democrat and a Republican at each one.
Right. Violation of the law, number 1,
Yeah.
right? Were you ever threatened?
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, violation of the law, number 2. Did they sneak in ballots in that back door?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Violation ballot number 3. Did they run things through multiple times?
Oh, yes.
Violation number 4. Did they not do signature verification?
Correct.
Yes.
Violation number 5. Did the sworn affidavit said, "Oh, we did it someplace else"? If he had been cross-examined, what's the first question I would have asked him on the stand in cross-examination?
Where?
Oh, really? Where was that? Because I didn't see any notice coming out telling the required observers where they were going to do that signature verification. So even if you did that, violation of law number 6, I'm running out of fingers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we were very intimidated, very threatened, and it was still mask season.
Yep.
And they could be up there on their little platform, mask down, and they would run over to us and we just put it down a little bit. But anyway, we had, I have lost track of how this went, but we had many people go with their signed affidavits to Lansing, and our own legislature turned it down. And was there anything else that could have been?
Well, this is, so, several pieces of that. All the sworn affidavits that got introduced in the complaint that was filed in the Constantino case, that the judge on a motion to dismiss, did I talk about this in the movie? I've seen the movie so many times I can't remember. So, and the judge on a motion to dismiss ignored all the sworn testimony because the government official in charge of the TCF Center said everything was perfect. On a motion, does any lawyers in the room? We got any lawyers? So on a motion to dismiss, you're supposed to accept all the allegations in the complaint as true, and only if they are all true, it still doesn't meet the legal standard, can you dismiss it. What the judge did in the Constantino case is weigh the competing affidavits. They're not supposed to do that. And then side with the government. Now, the government official who was in charge of the TCF Center, if all the sworn affidavits are true, he's committing a whole bunch of felonies. And he says, oh no, everything was perfect, and we don't even get a chance to cross-examine him, and then the judge throws out the case. That was highly improper. But then it gets up to the Court of Appeals, and 2-1, they say, it's all fine. And the dissenting judge says, you can't do this. And then it goes up to the Michigan Supreme Court, and they say, we don't even see an issue here, except the dissent said, oh my God, of course there's an issue here. This is an outrage. So the court thing, the courts were abrogating their duties to deal with these things. And the legislature, I was not that familiar with the Michigan legislature, but what I said about the Pennsylvania legislature seems to be highly true. When they wouldn't even let the alternate electors meet where they're supposed to meet, to cast votes if any of the legal challenges had gone Trump's way, and those guys, the statute in Michigan says the electors have to meet in the state capitol on the designated day to cast their votes. And they wouldn't let them into the state capitol. So I guarantee you, if Trump had won one of those cases and the court determined that Trump actually won Michigan, then you would have seen the arguments, well, they didn't vote in the legislature, so they can't be counted. Right? So, I mean, it was, and that was the Republicans that did that. I'm sorry, Republicans. We got to come up with a better name for those guys.
Well, we got the rhino.
Yeah, rhino.
We're working on it.
Yeah.
Dr. Eastman, now I've watched the movie 4 times in 4 days, and all of a sudden it occurred to me, when you get into that part about the Electoral Act of 1887, and that you used that as your reason for making the recommendation that the vice president could send the electors back to the state's legislature and re-examine. And then the legislature came along afterwards and changed the Electoral Act.
Right.
Now, doesn't that mean that the state legislature were interpreting the law?
Well, so the Electoral Count Act was by Congress, and I got to back up a little bit on the story here. So you've got the election of 1876, Rutherford versus Hayes versus Tilden, and it's one of the it's like the third election since the end of the Civil War, and there's still a lot of hostility about blacks voting and all sorts of illegality going on in the southern states, and you get competing people saying, oh, we're the authority in this state, not the other people who are the authority. And so there were 2 slates of electors from 3 or 4 different states that go up. And if any of those electors go toward Tilden, then Tilden's going to win, because he's got a large enough majority with all the rest of the states. But if all of them go toward Hayes, then Hayes is going to win. And so they create a commission. And the creation, they can't figure this out. And the Republicans are arguing in 1876 and 1877 that only the vice president has the authority to resolve this dispute, right? But that's creating a conflict, and so they decide to create a commission to resolve it. And they give to the commission whatever authority Congress has, if any. They say, in the statute where they create the commission, they say whatever authority we have, if any, they have. In other words, even then, the issue of whether it's Congress or the vice president to resolve disputes is not settled. They create this commission, and it's supposed to be a 9-member commission, 4 Democrat appointees, 4 Republican appointees, and a justice of the Supreme Court that everybody recognized was neutral. Right, and so therefore it's obviously intensely partisan, but the deciding vote is going to be the neutral guy. Well, Ohio decides we'll solve that problem. We're going to appoint that Supreme Court justice to U.S. Senate and get him out of there, and they have to put somebody else in who was not neutral, who was Republican, and every vote of the commission for every one of those electoral boards came down 5-4 or 4-3, whatever the number was. And for Hayes, and Hayes won the election by 1 vote. And there was almost a renewal of the Civil War over it, right? And then they fought for 10 years to create the Electoral Count Act so that we wouldn't have that problem. But the Electoral Count Act took as a given when they created the Electoral Commission. They were still very uncertain about, does Congress have any power here at all? And they create the Electoral Count Act that says Congress is going to be the one that resolves the disputes. And the problem with that is, in my view, that's a usurpation of power that the founders deliberately did not give to Congress, because it subsumes the presidency under the Congress, it destroys separation of powers, what have you. And in 2022, when they revised the Electoral Count Act to get rid of the one provision of the clause that I thought was right, which is if there's a failed election, the power goes back to the state legislatures to decide what to do about it. They got rid of that altogether. As you saw it talked about in the movie, and I think they then they said the vice president is only a ministerial. He's just the high-paid letter opener. And that takes the usurpation even further, in my view.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Well, you know what, because Lawfare is so pervasive, I think we're all Dr. Eastmans now.
Oh, good.
And so I wonder if you could tell these good people what we can do to
Sure.
help you, because if we help you, we help ourselves.
Sure. So I'm going to ask you a couple of things. One, if you're not already involved with Magnificent Republic because they're doing stuff to try and save the Republic, get involved and keep informed. Two, if you can, go to my legal defense fund site, givesendgo.com/Eastman. Look, I've incurred nearly 1.7 million in legal fees fighting 18 different actions in dealing with this. You'll see from the website it's raised nearly $1 million. So anything you can do to help is great. But the website is also a Christian website where people can send prayers, and thousands of people have sent prayers as well. They're heartwarming. My wife and I read them. Third is we use it as a bit of a blog where I post things that are particularly insightful about what's going on. Links to studies, updates, and what happened 2 days ago in Arizona, a major denial of an appeal by the Attorney General against us. So we're going to have to get a new grand jury and they decide whether it should have been indicted at all or not. So those kind of things are there. But the one update that I'm most proud of, and I want you to go look at it, whether you make a donation or give me a prayer, go look at this update, but be sitting down because it'll bring tears to your eyes. Update 43 is an article my children wrote defending their dad.
Oh.
And when the bar disciplinary recommendation of disbarment came down, my son is an astronautical engineer in Alabama, and he lost his job because he wouldn't take the vaccine shot because it violates our faith. And he adhered to his faith. His wife was pregnant. He went 3 months without a paycheck. And we asked him, do you need help? He said, no, I can cover it for 3 months, but if it goes beyond that, I might have to have some help. And just shy of 3 months, he got a new job offer at a company that was doing more space-related business directly in his line of work, closer to his house. And when they asked him what his salary was, he said what his old salary was, and the lovely lady in the HR department said, oh, dearie, you need to be higher than that. So he got a triple win for standing on his principle.
Yeah.
In the meantime, he said, I got to have a backup plan here. Because all of the industry is tied to these Biden government contracts, and they're all saying we're going to lose our jobs if we don't do the vaccine. So his backup plan, he's always been interested in theology. He never wanted to do law, but he sat around the dinner table with me and got kind of infected by it. And he said, well, maybe I'll do canon law, right, as a backup plan. Now, he had no theology studies in his background, and so he realized he had to go get a master's degree in theology. And so he's now 7/12 of the way through the online master's degree program in theology. But he's in the middle of that when this bar discipline decision comes down on Wednesday of Holy Week. And it takes effect 3 days later.
Oh my goodness.
So for anybody in this audience that's Christian, you understand the importance of the Triduum in Holy Week. So he and his sister, my daughter, decided to write an article around that theme for Blaze magazine, and it's linked. It's linked at Update 43, and you can read it, and it's heartwarming. And I tell people, how do you keep doing this? How do you keep up the fight? I couldn't do it without my faith, but as importantly, without my family backing me. And you'll see the level of support I get from my family by reading that article.